a community in grief, a child gone without a trace, and a mother who became one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives. This is the story of Cindy Rodriguez Singh and her 6-year-old son, Noel. It all started in a quiet Texas suburb, but the case quickly spiraled into an international mystery that captured the world's attention. The alarm was first raised when a welfare check was requested for young Noel. He hadn't been seen for months, and concern was growing. When investigators began to dig deeper, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of alleged abuse and neglect. The stories that emerged painted a grim picture of Noel's life, far from the happy childhood he deserved. But just as the investigation was gaining momentum, the primary suspect, Noel's own mother, Cindy, vanished. The search for Cindy Rodriguez Singh went global. She had fled the country, traveling thousands of miles to India with her new husband and other children, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. The biggest question of all, where was Noel? The FBI placed her on their notorious 10 most wanted list, a rare move for a fugitive mother, escalating the manhunt to a global scale. The world watched, holding its breath, hoping for a breakthrough. Finally, after a coordinated effort between us and international authorities, Cindy was captured in India and extradited back to the United States to face justice. Her arrest brought a sense of relief, but it also opened a new, darker chapter in this tragedy. With Cindy in custody, the focus shifted entirely to finding the truth about what happened to her son. The details that have since been revealed are more harrowing than anyone could have imagined. Investigators now believe Noel is no longer alive, and the search for him has become a search for his remains, and for justice. This case is far from over, as a community and a nation wait for answers, hoping to finally uncover the heartbreaking truth of what really happened to little Noel. The sky over Everman, Texas, was heavy with heat and secrets when, in March of 2023, Child Protective Services tipped off local police. Cindy Rodriguez Singh's 6-year-old son, Noel, hadn't been seen in months. By the time officers knocked on her door, the family home was tense, silent, fractured. What followed would set off a manhunt of countrywide proportions, one that ended halfway around the world. Cindy opened the door, her face calm, eyes guarded. Behind her, 6 children stared blankly, but there was no sign of Noel. He hadn't gotten on the flight to Mexico she claimed he was on. He didn't board with the rest of her children. Cindy insisted he was living with his biological father down in Mexico. But investigators were already smelling smoke. 2 days after the welfare check, Cindy, her husband Arshdeep Singh, and 6 of her children boarded an international flight not to Mexico, as she had claimed to officers, but to India. Noel was not with them. He was nowhere to be seen. The warning lights flashed red. A grand jury in Tarrant County struck first, in October 2023, that they handed down a capital murder indictment. The Indian Express to the very next day, the FBI issued a federal arrest warrant for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, citing Cindy's sudden escape from the country. But as the investigation deepened, whispers came, stories so chilling they haunted those who heard them. Noel wasn't just missing. Witnesses told police Cindy had referred to her son as evil, even possessed, as though he were something other than her own flesh and blood. At the same time, relatives described wanting to change his diaper, but Cindy refusing, claiming it was too bothersome, too demeaning. In cruel detail, they said, she withheld food and even water, neglecting him so she wouldn't have to deal with the mess. Even more disturbing, Cindy allegedly struck Noel with a set of keys, leaving bruises, as punishment when he disobeyed or simply when she could no longer bear the sight of him. Some claimed she believed he threatened the future of her newborn twins, that in her mind, he might harm them. Law enforcement didn't only rely on testimony. Cadaver dogs alerted to particular spots on the property underneath a newly poured concrete patio and near a discarded carpet. Strange, because the carpet had been thrown out right before Cindy fled. Did she know something they didn't? Investigators started digging with their hearts pounding. As authorities poured over the scene in Everman, Cindy's image shifted from distressed mother to dangerous fugitive. Meanwhile, police painted a portrait of a fractured home. Noel was born premature, with chronic lung disease, developmental, and speech delays vulnerabilities that made him utterly dependent. And when they finally left Texas, in their wake came suspicion and anguish. The community in Everman, once quiet and sleepy, was now burning with unanswered questions. Why would a mother flee leaving 6 other children in tow without her missing child? Why the lies about Mexico and the sudden trip to India? Where was Noel, and was he still alive? With the FBI now calling Cindy a flight risk, there seemed little hope she would ever return voluntarily. But then, months later, the unthinkable happened. She was arrested. On August 20, 2025, Indian authorities, working with the FBI, detained Cindy Rodriguez Singh. CBS news outlets exploded with the headline, "The top 10 most wanted mother had finally been found." The Indian Express, she was flown back to Texas, handed over to the Tarrant County Sheriff's Office, and booked into jail on a $10 million bond. But arrest wasn't justice, not yet. Noel's body was still nowhere to be found. The concrete patio where cadaver dogs once alerted, dredged. The discarded carpet, gone. Investigators were left standing in that dusty Texas yard, digging into dirt and memory, desperate for any trace of the missing boy. Reddit. As Cindy sits behind bars, facing charges that carry the weight of the gravest crime imaginable, one shattering question lingers. What really happened to Noel? The man who hunted her across continents, the community that cried for answers, the forensic team still combing for evidence, all now racing against time. And in that race, every second seems like betrayal, every clue like a lie waiting to be exposed. They say truth is stranger than fiction. In Cindy Rodriguez Singh's case, the truth feels more sinister, more tragic than anything a novelist could imagine. The world thought the case had reached its peak the day Cindy Rodriguez Singh was flown back to Texas in handcuffs, surrounded by federal agents and cameras flashing like lightning strikes. But investigators knew better. Her arrest wasn't the end, it was the start of a darker descent into the truth. A truth buried under concrete, lies, and fear. The interrogation room was cold, washed in blue fluorescent light. Cindy sat with her hands clasped tightly, jaw locked, her eyes darting anywhere but at the investigators' faces. She refused to answer most questions. She asked for a lawyer, and after that, the silence began. It was a chilling silence that made the detectives' stomachs turn. Because silence is a shield. Silence is control. Silence is guilt. But silence couldn't stop the investigation. Detective April Martin, one of the lead investigators, had spent months living and breathing this case. She knew every timeline, every witness statement, every single inconsistency in Cindy's stories. And she knew something else. Every fugitive leaves a trail, no matter how fast they run. The first break came from an unexpected place. An old neighbor, Mrs. Ortega, who lived directly across from Cindy's home in Everman. In her trembling hands, she held a cracked cell phone, pulled from deep within a junk drawer. On it was a video, time-stamped October 2025, months before Noel was even reported missing. The footage showed Noel outside. He was barefoot, shivering, and so small he looked like a shadow. He tried to speak, but his words were slurred, soft, like someone struggling just to breathe. Moments later, Cindy opened the door. She didn't pick him up. She didn't comfort him. She grabbed him by the wrist and yanked him inside. The door slammed shut, the sound sharp as a gunshot. Detective Martin watched the clip 3 times. Each time, the dread grew heavier. Neighbors had spoken before of seeing Noel hungry, weak, or bruised, but seeing the abuse on camera hit differently. The video wasn't evidence of death, but it was evidence of a pattern of cruelty, neglect, desperation, and fear. As the team dug deeper, a troubling discovery emerged. Cindy had taken out a personal loan months before her escape. Thousands of dollars. Money she withdrew entirely in cash. Investigators traced ATM footage from those days, and in one grainy clip, Cindy stood at the machine, stuffing money into an envelope, her eyes darting around like she was being watched. Was she paying someone off? Hiding something? Or was she preparing to flee long before Child Protective Services ever knocked on her door? And then came the tip that changed everything. A former friend of the family, a woman named Delilah, who had visited the home often, reached out. Her voice shook on the phone as she described something she had kept buried for months. "Cindy told me Noel was gone. Long before the police ever came," she whispered. "What do you mean, gone?" the detective asked. She said he didn't wake up, and that Arshdeep was going to take care of it. A chill ran through every investigator who heard those words. If Delilah was telling the truth, then Noel may have died inside that house, not in March 2023, but months earlier. The timeline was shattering. Detectives immediately turned their attention to Arshdeep Singh, Cindy's husband, the man who boarded the same flight to India and vanished alongside her. While Cindy had been caught, Arshdeep remained missing. A ghost. A shadow. The man who may have helped bury or hide a child's body. Interpol issued a notice, and the FBI worked with Indian authorities, but every lead went cold. Every address was empty. Every relative refused to speak. Meanwhile, in Texas, forensic teams returned to the Everman property for a second, more aggressive search. They ripped apart walls, lifted floorboards, and drained septic tanks. The concrete patio, the same one neighbors said had been poured overnight, was broken apart, jackhammer by jackhammer. Dust filled the air, shards of concrete splintered like bones. But still, no remains. Yet something was found. Under a layer of earth, buried beneath a patch of loose dirt near the back fence, detectives unearthed a small plastic bag. Inside was a child's shirt, blue, faded, tiny. It was the exact shirt Noel had been wearing in one of the last known photos of him. It wasn't a body, but it was something. Something that whispered of tragedy. DNA tests later confirmed it belonged to Noel. This discovery cracked the case wide open. Prosecutors now believed they had enough circumstantial evidence to pursue capital murder, even without a body. The belief was simple, chilling, and unwavering. Noel did not leave that property alive. In jail, Cindy stayed silent. No confessions, no explanations, no tears. But as investigators tightened the noose around her lies, they found something else, something that threw the entire case into even deeper confusion. Financial records showed that, shortly before her escape, Cindy had purchased a burner phone. Its last ping, before being deactivated, placed her near an abandoned storage facility just outside Fort Worth. Detectives raced there, prying open units, their flashlights slicing through the dark, dust hanging in the air like fog. And inside storage unit 3B, they found a locked trunk. It was old, heavy, and bound with a rusted chain. A detective lifted the trunk lid, his hands shaking, and froze. Inside was something that made everyone step back. It wasn't a body. It wasn't bones. It was something even more disturbing. A blood-stained blanket, child-sized, damp with time, hidden like a secret that was never meant to be found. For the first time, investigators felt the electrifying, terrifying certainty that they were getting close. Too close. Because someone had been in that unit recently, someone who didn't want the truth coming out. As Detective Martin turned to leave, she noticed a small smear of fresh mud on the floor, leading toward the exit. Someone else had been there. Someone who may still be watching them. Someone who may be protecting Cindy or hiding something far, far worse. The trail was no longer cold. It was burning, and the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. The discovery inside storage unit 3B sent a wave of electric panic through the whole investigative team. The blanket wasn't just a forgotten scrap of fabric, it was a signal, a message, a warning. Someone else had been guarding that storage unit, someone who still walked free. And one name rose immediately to the top of the suspect list: Arshdeep Singh, Cindy's husband, the last adult to see Noel alive, the man who boarded the plane with her, and now, the ghost who refused to be found. Detective April Martin felt the noose of urgency tighten. If Arshdeep was still in the U.S., he could erase evidence. If he was abroad, he could disappear forever. Either way, they were running out of time. Investigators began pulling every thread they could find. Immigration logs, cell tower pings, bank withdrawals. Nothing. It was like Arshdeep had been swallowed by the earth. But then came the break they needed. A gas station camera near the storage facility showed a blurry figure just one night before detectives arrived. A man in a hoodie. Too tall to be Cindy. Too fast to be a homeless wanderer. He moved with purpose, pulling gloves from his pockets. The timestamp placed him there exactly 7 minutes before dawn, the moment when shadows are deepest. The footage wasn't clear, but Detective Martin recognized the gait instantly. She had watched the airport surveillance footage from India dozens of times. The stride, the shoulders, the timing. It was Arshdeep. He had returned, not to confess, not to surrender, but to clean up whatever evidence he had left behind. Which meant one thing. There was still more he hadn't erased. The next morning, a SWAT team stormed the edges of a rural farmland area outside Fort Worth. It belonged to a man connected to Arshdeep's extended family. Inside the barn, the team uncovered a shallow pit covered in plywood, dirt, and debris. The pit held small toys, a broken sippy cup, a children's backpack. Detective Martin stared at the items, a hollow ache forming in her chest. These weren't random belongings. These were Noelle's. And beneath that, one more horrifying discovery. A black, water-damaged phone. The device was cracked, dead, useless at first glance, but in the world of criminal investigations, even a dead phone had a heartbeat. Digital forensics spent 14 hours extracting whatever they could from its corrupted memory. At midnight, the files finally appeared. Photos, videos, voice memos. Most were ordinary moments from an ordinary home. The kids playing, Cindy cooking, everyday chaos. But one video stood out, time-stamped weeks before Noelle's disappearance. The camera was pointed at the floor. You could hear Cindy's voice, sharp, cold, furious. "Noelle, stop crying. Stop it. You need to learn," she hissed. A thud followed, a gasp, a small whimper, then silence. Detectives watched the video with clenched jaws. They had seen cruelty before, but the escalation, the finality of it felt like watching a storm break a fragile branch. But the most devastating piece of evidence was not the video. It was the audio file found minutes later, just a few seconds long. A whispered conversation between Cindy and Arshdeep. "Cindy, what are we going to do?" Arshdeep, "We'll fix it. No one will find him." "No one." "Cindy, are you sure?" Arshdeep, "I buried him. It's done." 4 words that froze every investigator in place. "I buried him. It's done." That file hit the case like a nuclear blast. The DA moved immediately, building the strongest murder case possible. A capital murder conviction no longer depended on finding a body. The audio alone was a death sentence in legal terms. But the question remained. Where was Noelle? The answer came from an unexpected direction. 2 weeks into the renewed search, a hunter walking through a remote wooded area south of Everman noticed something strange. An area of earth slightly sunken, covered with stones arranged in a pattern too deliberate to be natural. He reported it. Crime scene teams arrived within an hour. They began digging as the wind cut through the trees, cold and unforgiving. 6 inches down, the soil changed color. 12 inches, a smell surfaced. 14 inches, cloth appeared. At 18 inches, the truth came out of the ground. A small body, fragile, curled, wrapped in a plastic trash bag. Noelle. Detective Martin fell silent. The entire team stood in stillness, caps removed, hearts heavy. The search that had tormented them for months had ended, but not with hope. Only heartbreak. Back in the Tarrant County Jail, they told Cindy what they had found. For the first time, her mask cracked. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't confess. But her hands began to shake violently, as if the truth she had buried under dirt and lies had finally clawed its way back to her. A warrant for Arshdeep was issued globally, and days later, in a small town in Punjab, Indian police cornered him in a relative's house. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He simply lowered his head as they cuffed him, knowing the truth had finally caught up. The trial became one of the most watched cases in Texas. Prosecutors laid out every second of abuse, every lie, every step of the escape, every piece of hidden evidence. And finally, the damning audio confession. The jury deliberated only 4 hours, Cindy Rodriguez Singh was found guilty of capital murder. Arshdeep Singh was found guilty of tampering with the corpse and conspiracy to commit murder. The courtroom was silent as the verdicts were read except for one sound. A quiet sob from a woman in the back row. Noel's former teacher, she whispered, almost to herself, "He was such a sweet boy." Noel's grave was marked simply, "Loved, remembered, found." Detective Martin stood before it days later, feeling the weight of everything they had uncovered, not just the crime, but the secrets, the fear, the betrayal that had spiraled into tragedy. Cases like this stay with investigators forever. They scar, they linger, they whisper at night. As she turned away from the grave, she knew one thing: people will replay this story in their minds for years. Because evil doesn't need monsters. Sometimes, it hides behind a mother's smile. If this story shook you, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.